As a member of the first world living in this modern society, you're less likely to be the victim of murder, rape, assault. You're less likely to be ridden with parasites, to be malnourished. You're less likely to fall in a hole and break your ankle. You're less likely to fall out of a tree from which you're trying to grab honey. You're less likely to be gored by a wild animal which you're trying to eat to make your dinner. We truly live in the safest era in human history. All right? That's the good news, and it's important. Like, we really should realize how privileged we are to live in the world that we do. But of course, that's not why we're here. We're not here to pat ourselves on the back and be like, yeah, good job. We're here because we do have problems, and they're pretty big problems. We live in an era when we have an epidemic of obesity, we have an epidemic of diabetes, we have an epidemic of depression, we have an epidemic of social isolation, and an epidemic of anxiety, right? And from my perspective, we happen to have an epidemic that's not really recognized by the medical community. We have an epidemic of movement retardation, right? As I walk along in the streets, I see people with terrible biomechanics. I see people with posture that looks ridiculous. I see people who are not just fat, they're uncoordinated, they're weak, they're slow, they have low muscle tone, they're chronically overly tense, right? I think that's a big problem. I think that is taking a lot away from the value of being a human being, of being alive. It sucks to not be able to move. If you've ever been injured, you realize what it is, right? Put on a 50-pound weight vest and carry that around for a day. How does it feel to be 50 pounds overweight? It sucks. So the statistics are pretty scary. Well, as I said earlier, 1 in 3 Americans is considered obese. 2 out of 3 are considered overweight. And those statistics are based on the BMI. If you're an athlete, BMI overestimates how fat your body is. But if you're general population and not athletic, it actually underestimates it. So when we look at large populations of unathletic people, which is the vast majority of our nation, we're actually underestimating how much of a problem body fatness is. And we're not even looking at the problem of people who just don't have muscular development, right? Not only are they not growing, not only are they growing too much fat, they're not growing muscle at all. The muscle is getting starved. 1 out of 10 Americans are on antidepressants. 1 out of 4 women are on psychiatric medication of one type or another. And 4 out of 10 Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic. So that's the problem, right? There's a flip side to all the benefits that we accrue, right? We're taller and live longer today because we're not malnourished. But we have an epidemic of excessive and deranged nutrition. We eat more than we ever have, but more of it is processed junk. And it's designed by companies who have to profit by getting you to eat more, right? This is the bottom line. If there are 300 million people in the United States and you're a food corporation and those people eat an average of 2,500 calories a day, if you can create a product that makes them eat 2,700 calories a day, you won, right? And it doesn't matter that those people are fatter and more unhealthy. Guess what? The corporation's raking in profits. So everything that is designed, every processed food that you eat there is successful. It exists because it causes you to eat more than you're supposed to, right? There's one problem. People have completely changed in our perception of food. Dessert used to be a once in a long wild treat, right? Once in a blue moon. Now I see kids who come into our programs and they've got Coke for breakfast, with breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Their breakfasts are sugary cereals. Their lunches are peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that are 90% jelly and white bread. And then on top of that, they're eating candy bars. And their idea of a healthy thing to have with their workout is Gatorade. And they're drinking quarts of it, right? And then when they go home and have dinner, if their parents can convince them to eat any real food at all, they get rewarded with pastries and ice cream. All those junk calories aren't just fattening us up, they're crowding out the food that actually nourishes our bodies and allows us to thrive, to recover from exercise, to become physically strong people. Part of what we need to do is just return to eating like human beings. Like I said, you're smarter than your ancestors, right? There's something called the Flynn effect. You can look it up. Basically, IQ norms have to be re-normed every generation over the last 100 years because what was an average score then is no longer an average score, right? People's scores have gone up by 10 points or 15 points. We have more access to literature, right? There were not so many books in the past. Now you can have a book that fits exactly to what you like, right? You can target your exact fantasies in a book. They're out there. We have Google. We have laptops. We have smartphones. I challenged myself to go without reading anything on my smartphone for a weekend. It was kind of hard. I love sitting there and geeking out on statistics like these. So we have access to information in a way that has never been possible before. And we have mental stimulation from an earlier and earlier age through school. But there's a flip side to that, right? All that time that we spend in school is time that we're not playing, that we're not socializing in an unstructured environment. I was looking at data on recess. Recess in Seattle is going to be cut back for next year for second and third graders from 3 15-minute periods to 2 15-minute periods. The reason for it is that they feel like they can't, the children can't play that long without having conflict. So if these children go through life and every time they might actually have to deal with somebody and solve a conflict over how you play a game, an adult steps in and says, no, we're going to put you in front of a computer. How are they going to deal with the workplace, right? How are they going to deal with having friends? How are they going to deal with having a relationship? All that time that we spend on top of our laptops, on our smartphones, interfacing with the screen is time that we're not talking to actual people. Stephen Lowe's here today. I've spent hours and hours talking with Stephen online. I'd never seen his face until I picked him up from the airport this week, right? It's great that we can find people who are similar to us, who have interests that are like ours, but interacting with somebody via text is not the same as interacting with someone face to face. Well, is it 60? I didn't look up the statistics, sorry. I think it's like 60% of communication is nonverbal, right? So we're missing out a tremendous amount when we're choosing to communicate in forms that are way less information dense, right? That aren't what we're evolved for. Your brain is evolved to respond to social stimulus that involves people's voices and seeing their faces move, right? It's not evolved for texting. Texting doesn't give you the same things. And so if you spend all your time texting, you spend all your time in front of a laptop, that's time that you're not interacting with real people. So we live in a generation where we're information geniuses, right? We can process information faster, we can cite facts better than anybody in history. But we're people and movement idiots, right? We don't know how to deal with conflict. We don't know how to deal with people who are different from us. We don't know how to actually develop social groups, right? And I think everyone here who's invested in movement can see that the average person is incredibly physically incapable on any sort of rational scale. Most of the people, almost everyone who walks in here cannot do a pull-up. Most people can't do a decent push-up, right? That's the norm now. Just living in a more rural town with people who are less educated, who are less plugged in, I had 40% of the kids could do pull-ups, right? Because they got to play in trees, because their parents weren't afraid to let them go outside. We live in the safest era in history, really we do. Like, crime has been falling since the 1990s, and yet people still are completely terrified to let their children step outside and play outside. This used to be what it is. Your kids get home from school, you make sure their homework's done, you say, go outside, don't come back till it's dark. Right? Those kids learned how to socialize with their friends. They learned how to be physically active and to enjoy it and not view it as something imposed by some authority. Right? In our past, kids grew up and they got punched in the face. Right? They climbed trees where maybe a limb could break. They went swimming in rivers where, yeah, you could drown. And all those things are risky, right? If you get punched in the face, you can get brain damage. If you climb a tree and the tree breaks, you can fall and get hurt. If you're in a river, you can drown. But without risk, we don't get stronger. Without stressors, we don't adapt, right? You can't get stronger without stressing yourself, right? I want you to show me a strength training program that doesn't involve doing something that's harder, right? Doing something that's more difficult, doing something that is potentially just a little bit dangerous. A kid who has been in a fist fight, a kid who has swum through a river, who has taken his life in his own hands and climbed a cliff or climbed a tree, who's had to depend on that, when he has to take the leap to ask a girl or boy out that they're interested in, maybe they're a little bit more confident. When they have to go in for that interview that scares them, they're going to be better prepared because they've actually had to depend on themselves at some point in their life. Everything hasn't been structured and put there for them. And more, that's just something that we don't have. I don't want to go back to the past, right? I don't want to die when I'm 45 years old. I don't want to see 30% of my male friends be the victims of either warfare or murder, right? I don't want my sister, my wife, my mother, my daughter to be a victim of rape or kidnapping. I don't want to be parasite-ridden or malnourished, right? I don't want to be 5'5" and 130 pounds. But we need to recognize that there's something that's been lost in attaining this world that we live in, right? We have power at our fingertips that nobody has ever had. We have affluence that nobody has ever had. And yet, we're squandering it, being unhappy, obese, not moving, right? We need to eat real food, right? The food that we had tonight, I thought was wonderful food. And thank you to everybody who cooked here. Thank you so much. That's the type of thing that nourishes you so that you can perform well. It's the type of thing that nourishes you as a person, right? It nourishes your emotional life because you know that somebody put the effort in to make it. And that person actually cared about it, right? We need to interact with nature. Scott talked about the idea of grounding yourself, right? There's other research that indicates that just being around nature, it renews us because it interacts with parts of our brain that aren't stimulated by urban environments, right? So they show that if you take someone and have them go on a 20-minute nature walk, right, it's equivalent to letting them have an hour-and-a-half nap in the middle of their workday as far as increasing their productivity. You need to get out into the woods. You need to get out where you can get dirt on your hands. I'm amazed how many people I train with in parkour, I take them out and they're like, my hands are dirty. Like, really? That's a good thing, right? Like, when I was a kid, I knew it was a good day because I came home and my hands and my feet were dirty and I was scratched all over. And that's how I want to be as an adult. That's how I want to empower people to be. We need to move. There's really interesting research. Like, your brain is not designed primarily to think. It's designed to control this huge, complex apparatus, right? Every time you do a jump, you're doing calculations that are incredibly complex, right? And that's actually what the majority of your brain does. The cognitive portion, the thinking part, is the smallest part, right? If we're not getting out and moving, we're not nourishing the most basic part of our brains. You need to move. And we need to have communities, right? I love this. I love that all these people came out to talk about parkour, to do parkour, to support each other, because all that other stuff is great too, but if we're not interacting with people, it doesn't work. We have to have that nutrition of other people in our lives, right? We are social creatures. If you don't touch a baby, it dies, right? If you raise somebody without interaction with other people, after a certain point, they can't ever learn to speak. They can't ever really learn to think. Like, we are dependent upon the people around us. We are dependent upon a network, and we have to do that, right? And the parkour community is amazing because it brings people together. So we need all these things. And we need to take risks, right? We can't live, if we try to build a bubble around ourselves that protects us completely from risk, right? I'm never going to fall down and get scratched. I'm never going to get rejected. I'm never going to get in a fight, right? You're never going to achieve anything. You're never going to have a true sense of who you are as a person. It's only through failure that we can truly find success, right? It's when you do a jump 20 times, 30 times, and you can't get it, and then you finally can get it, that's when it's meaningful, right? We have to let go of this culture that tells us that risk is something to be gotten rid of completely, right? That no child should ever fall down, that nobody should ever die because of an accident. We don't want people to get hurt, but without some risk that they will, they'll never grow. So that was my rant. And